This is Tess Tucker, reading from my original Daughter of a Dead Woman, and here with Chapter 8, we start the Empire Strikes Back section. We've lost a lot of the campiness from the first section, so that's great, but instead of the campiness, with this section, I think I tried to be a little bit funnier, so there are some little funny, quirky moments. It was a great way to show how Tess kind of fits in with the gang these days. Fortunately, her 11-year-old voice is gone as I am reading, and my voice won't be quite as annoying because I'm not trying to sound as much like a child. But I very much enjoyed this section, actually, despite some of the campiness. You start to see how the characters develop a little bit differently with Tess there. But anyway, without further ado, here's Chapter 8, 3 ABY, The Rebellion Echo Base on planet Hoth. Never in her 11 years of life had Tess imagined she could be a hero of the rebellion. 3 years later, even more beyond her belief, at 14 years old she was among the rebellion on a remote base on the planet Hoth. That being addressed, it seemed far beneath her capabilities to constantly be the one to lead Han Solo to Leia Organa whenever their complicated relationship resulted in a grown-up game of hide-and-seek. She was in the command center, but last time she saw you coming, she ducked into the storage room, Tess told Han. She held out her hand expectantly. 5 credits, please. Han gave her a look, then reluctantly pulled some credits out of his pocket and shoveled them into the teenager's hand. Han stalked around the corner. Once he was far enough away, Tess pulled out her comlink. Leia? She said. She got a response immediately. Han again? Asked her friend's voice. Yep, go for the barracks. He knows about the storage room. Tired of watching Han and Leia's disgusting love games with no room in her pocket to squeeze more credits out of Han, Tess cut through the cargo transfer into the hangar where she knew she would find Luke. It was hard to pick out her friend among the other rebels with identical snowsuits, but she recognized Luke as the only one with a lightsaber in his belt. Are you going out there? She inquired, tentatively approaching his tauntaun and giving its neck a rub. Yep, checking for life readings, Luke told Tess, putting on his goggles. Tess hopped up on the tauntaun with ease, having practiced many a time in these past several months. Her thick red snowsuit padded her from feeling the coarse skin of the animal. Have you seen Han? He was supposed to be heading out too. Nope, but I'll find him for 5 credits, Tess promised with a sly grin. Luke grinned back at her, clearly knowing her ways. He couldn't blame her, though. There was not much for a kid to do on a rebel base. Do you know why tauntauns smell so bad? Tess asked. She promptly answered her own question. They get rid of waste through their skin. Like our sweat, but theirs is just worse. Somebody's been spending some time on the informational holographs in the command center, Luke mused. He lifted Tess off his tauntaun with ease and took her place. Leia made me, Tess admitted. Can I go with you? Checking for life readings doesn't last that long, and you don't even go that far. Please? I don't think Leia would like that, Luke told her, shaking his head. Tess rolled her eyes. She's not my mother, Tess reminded the man who she had come to think of as an older brother. I was a rebel hero at the Battle of Yavin too, just like you, Han, Chewie, and Leia. But somehow the fact that I'm 14 makes my tagging along with the rebellion a babysitting gig. I haven't been a child for a long time, Luke. Luke narrowed his eyes at her. Says the girl who spends all day messing with Han and Leia's heads, making those two go crazier than they already are. They just make it so easy, Tess sighed, chuckling a bit. It's all about control, Luke reminded her. Tess went to a nearby tauntaun and gave it a piece of an omnibar from her pocket. Don't speak Jedi with me, Skywalker, she boomed with an exaggerated deep voice. Luke shook his head with a laugh. I'll be back soon, he assured Tess. And go easy on Leia. She cares about you. She just wants you safe. Han left later than Luke, so it surprised Tess when the smuggler arrived sooner than her other friend. She had her nose pinched shut with one hand as she bathed a small tauntaun with the other. Did you see Luke when you were out there? Tess asked. Han pulled his mask, gloves, and hood off. Talk to him, Han told her. He hasn't come back yet? No, Tess informed Han. Leia kept trying to reach him. He always signs in, so the fact that his name isn't on there means he's not back. Besides, with you and Leia always hiding from each other, I know every place of this watch it kid, Han snapped, not entirely serious. Tess could tell he wasn't one for the cold, which just made his bickering with Leia all the more entertaining. Tess, put your hood back on before your ears turn blue and fall off, came a familiar voice from behind them. Tess didn't even need to turn around to know it was Leia. She approached the two of them, her dark hair in a perfect braid crown around her head and her snowsuit matching the snow itself. Tess, however, wore her hair in a small loose braid, pulling half her hair back and cascading down with the wavy loose hair. That and her red snowsuit stood out among the whites and tans. She always insisted on being quite the individual, but according to Leia, that just made her more childish. There was a time when Tess admired Leia more than anyone. She was a princess, and the daughter of the closest thing Tess had ever had to a father. That admiration was not completely gone, but after spending 3 years with her, though Tess was grateful for a place to stay with the closest thing she had to family, Leia had somehow convinced herself that Tess needed parenting. Sure, Tess had not grown up as royalty with the highest levels of education that Alderaan could offer, but she was 14 years old and more than capable of taking care of herself. Still, if anything, Leia was more like a big sister to Tess deep down. She did love Leia like a sister, and she was sure Leia felt the same, but they did get on each other's nerves. Most of the newer rebels even confused them as sisters. The resemblance between them was bafflingly strong for two who were not related. Even Tess could see that. Suddenly, the time of day struck fear in Tess's stomach. "Leia, it's almost nighttime," Tess said worriedly. "The temperature is about to drop like crazy, and the shield doors won't even be up for much longer." "I know," Leia sighed, putting a hand on the collar of Tess's snowsuit, rubbing her shoulder. "But you know Luke, he's just curious. He'll come in at the last minute perfectly fine." Han started replacing his snow gear. "I'm going out to check the perimeter just in case," he decided aloud. "Han, your tauntaun will freeze at the temperatures it will be out there in an hour from now," Leia reminded him nervously, "and we can't send rescues after the shield doors close." "I'll be back with Luke or not at all," Han promised. He kicked the sides of his tauntaun and was soon lost in the white snow. "Somehow I don't find that comforting," Leia called after him. She sighed deeply and turned to Tess. "You hungry?" she asked. Tess shook her head. Leia took the girl by the shoulders and started leading her towards the barracks. "It's probably going to be cold here soon. You should get off to bed." "I will," Tess said with a nod, compliantly making her way towards the barracks. "Good night." "Night," Leia called back with a soft smile. She made her way back to the command center. However, as soon as Leia was gone, Tess swung her pack over her shoulders, hopped on a tauntaun, and raced after Han in hopes of helping him find Luke. Chapter 9. Tess found herself wrapping her hands around her tauntaun's neck as her fingers slowly lost feeling and she could not even tell if she was holding onto the reins or not. She looked up at the sky. She knew she didn't have long until nightfall. She was about to set up the tarp in her pack, but before she even dragged it off her shoulders, she saw a gray mound in the distance. To Tess's relief, she neared it and saw that it was what she expected, a cave. Then her nerves spiked when she remembered what creatures typically inhabited the caves on Hoth. Wampas. Mustering her courage, Tess slowly entered the cave. She knew that if it was uninhabited, it would be the perfect place to allow her tauntaun to hibernate through the night, the only way it would survive the temperatures. And Tess, though well equipped with a snowsuit, was still human, and even with a tarp to block the wind speeds, even she was not guaranteed to last the night without the shelter of something like this cave. Tess knew better than to trust the tauntaun not to make noise, so she put an omnibar in its mouth and left it outside the cave. Though the cave itself was white on the outside, darkness came fast on the inside. The white became gray, and the gray became darker and darker. Looking further down the cave, she could see no ending, just a fade into black. Tess listened as hard as she could, but the wind from outside was overpowering anything she could have heard. One of the distinct signs that a wampa was in a cave would be its loud chomping, but she wouldn't be able to hear that until she was too close. Tess tried another tactic. Wampas were known to suspend demobilized but live prey from the ceiling for later consumption. As soon as Tess's eyes found the ceiling, they found the Wampa's most recent capture. Luke! Checking her perimeter to make sure the creature was not nearby, Tess rushed to her friend. "Luke!" she whispered nervously once near, touching his freezing cold face in an attempt to wake him. "Luke, wake up!" Sure enough, Luke's blue eyes showed themselves. "Tess? We're in a wampa cave," Tess said softly as she could, just in case the wampa was near. Luke suddenly remembered how he had come to be in this state, and his eyes widened. "Tess, you have to get out of here. It's too dangerous," Luke insisted. He reached up towards his legs in an attempt to free himself, but the ice was too strong. He then brought a hand to his belt. "My lightsaber, it's gone." "I'll find it," Tess insisted, turning to look. "No!" Luke snapped. He pointed ahead. Tess followed his finger. Fear rose up in Tess's throat. Not only did she see the silver glow of Luke's lightsaber, but right beside it was the gigantic white wampa, paws soaked in red blood as he savagely consumed a tauntaun. Tess turned back to Luke to ask him what to do. He was way ahead of her. Luke stretched out his hand with closed eyes. He was using the Force. Tess looked back towards the lightsaber, which shook in the ice but could not wiggle itself out. It might have been unconscious. Maybe it was to soothe her anxiety. Instinct was a possibility, too. Regardless of the reason, Tess reached up and took Luke's hand. Suddenly, she felt a surge of something powerful, something beyond imagination, and the lightsaber flew into Luke's hand. Tess didn't have time to contemplate what she had just felt. Luke detached himself from the ice of the cave ceiling and flipped himself into a stand. Hearing the sound of the lightsaber, the wampa turned around with a roar. Luke nudged Tess slightly, indicating that she stay put, as he leapt forward and sliced off the wampa's arm with ease. His speed propelled by the Force, Luke grabbed Tess's hand. "Run!" In order to keep their tauntaun alive longer, both Tess and Luke agreed that they would walk alongside it. Their best chance of surviving the night was to find another cave, but that was still incredibly dangerous because most of these caves housed wampas just like the one they had faced. "You shouldn't have come," Luke called at Tess through the wind. "We could die out here, you know that?" "Of course I know that," Tess snapped, her voice shaking with cold. "Tess, your nose is bleeding," Luke alerted her. He stopped the tauntaun, reached in his pocket for a cloth, and held it up to her face. "That happens a lot when it's cold, but unless you want a nostril frozen shut, making it even harder to breathe than it already is, I would wipe that down well." Luke inspected the tauntaun for a moment. Tess could not see his face well through the goggles and hood, but she knew he was frustrated. "This is exactly why you shouldn't have come," Luke muttered. "Because of a nosebleed?" Tess snapped. "That could have just as easily happened to you. And if I wouldn't have woken you up in that cave, the wampa probably would have gotten to you first. You should be thankful that I came." Suddenly, their tauntaun let out a high-pitched whine and collapsed on the snow, dead. Luke hung his head with a labored sigh. He pulled out his lightsaber and cut into the tauntaun's belly. "What are you doing?" Tess asked. "It'll keep you warm," Luke explained. "It'll smell like hell, but that's better than freezing to death. Get over here." "No!" Tess. "Luke, wait!" Tess assured him. She pulled her pack off her back and dragged 2 thick brown tarps out. Luke watched, not willing to admit that she came more prepared than him, as she secured one of the tarps on top of the snow and the other one on top of that tarp with an opening so that they could get inside and stay warm under it. After she finished setting up the small makeshift camp, she crossed to the dead tauntaun, then looked at Luke with disdain. "You cut it too much," she groaned. She knelt and touched the now ice-hardened insides of the tauntaun, then wiped her hand off on her pants. "If you don't cut it little by little, it all melts the air too fast and freezes within minutes, Luke." The sound of someone yelling in the distance nudged Luke awake. It took him a moment to remember where he was. That moment was interrupted with anxiety when he saw that Tess was not under the tarp with him. Luke tightened his goggles and exited the tarp tent. "Tess!" he called, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Tess!" She was not hard to see in her red snowsuit. Tess stood several feet away from the camp, yelling for help. "What are you doing?" Luke demanded, grabbing her wrist and starting to drag her back to camp. "How long have you been out here?" When Tess turned to face him, Luke could see that she had tears frozen to her cheeks. Her nose and ears were turning blue from cold. "They need to find us!" she cried. "They just need to!" "They will," Luke assured her. "Now get back into the tent." "No!" Tess retorted. "I'm not just sitting and waiting. I'm not giving up." "Even if it kills you?" Luke shouted, taking her by the shoulders and trying to shake her into realizing the danger of standing out here in the cold. "It won't!" snapped Tess, teary-eyed. "I won't let it. Leia, she doesn't know." Luke looked at her a moment, confused. "What doesn't Leia know?" he asked. Tess didn't respond at first. He looked at her a bit deeper. "Tess." "She doesn't know how much I love her," the 14-year-old sobbed. "I know I'm not always nice to her, and I don't always listen, but you, Han, and Leia have been like my family for the past 3 years. And Leia, I never told her because I'm too busy doing the opposite of whatever she tells me to do. I mean, look, she told me to go to bed, and now I'm in the middle of a snowy nowhere." Feeling she needed it, Luke wrapped Tess in a hug. She knew he wasn't one for many words, so Tess didn't really need them. "Come on," he said gently. "Come back to the tent. It's morning now. They'll be sending a rescue squad before you know it." Tess nodded and took his offered hand. She took about 3 steps towards the camp before her feet grew heavy, her head pounded, and her vision began to blur white. Is it snowing harder?" she muttered breathlessly. Suddenly, her legs fell out from beneath her and her vision went black. Chapter 10. The 2 rebel ships that had retrieved the 3 survivors lost in the snow landed in the Echo Base hangar one after the other. Princess Leia rushed over anxiously. They had told her that her 2 friends were in poor condition, and she assumed they spoke of Luke and Han. Leia had not seen Tess all day, but that was not uncommon, considering the teenager often wandered around the base. So when Han climbed out of the ship perfectly fine and the pilot handed him down a small frame in a familiar red snowsuit, Leia's heart almost stopped. "What happened?" Leia demanded frantically, rushing to Han's side and holding back her tears. Seeing Tess so pale and hanging so limply terrified her. "Apparently she went out to save Luke soon after I did," Han explained, mad at himself that, as close as he was to the base, he had not seen her leave it. "She found Luke and built shelter, but in the morning Luke found her outside calling for help. It looks like she was out there for at least half the night." "Oh no," Leia whispered, her emotions getting the best of her. "And Luke?" Han pointed behind Leia, and she turned around to see the man who was piloting the ship that found them helping a barely conscious Luke. They were taking him to the medical bay. "Attacked by a wampa," Han explained. "He has some nasty gashes, but not much cold damage. Luke said they would have died if Tess hadn't brought the shelter." As if to clarify that it was true, Leia looked at the seemingly lifeless form. She brushed Tess's hair aside and planted a kiss on her frozen forehead. "You're going to be all right," she whispered. Leia turned to the medical droid when they reached the medical bay. "You will give this girl the utmost treatment you can offer," the princess demanded. "Understand?" "Of course, Princess Leia, This girl is my family, understand?" Leia continued. "She was related to my biological mother. Please be certain that she is treated just as I would be." Tess was taken from Han's arms by one of the medical workers. Luke was already in a bed, getting covered in blankets and attached to vitality monitors so he could warm up before an imminent dunk in the bacta tank. But Luke was strong. Leia knew he would be fine. Several other medics entered the room. "Do all of you hear me?" Leia shouted at the medical bay. "This girl will be treated like royalty. If something happens to her..." Her voice breaking, Han saw the pain in her eyes before Leia even realized what she was feeling. He wrapped a hand around Leia's shoulder. Normally the princess would resist him, but instead she covered her face with her hands and turned towards him. Han watched as they took Tess to a separate room, holding Leia as she cried. "Master Luke, sir, it's so good to see you fully functional again," the golden droid C-3PO told his master. R2 added his own beeping expression of relief for Luke's recovery. Luke nodded absent-mindedly at the droids, his mind focused on the 14-year-old who remained unconscious in the bed on the other side of the room. He was so used to her bumbling about the base, exploring the ships in the hangar, feeding the tauntauns, and running errands for people in the command center. Seeing Tess so lifeless really bothered him. As if that was not enough for him to be concerned about, Leia had not left Tess's side all day. The princess had fallen asleep at the end of the bed about an hour ago, but now she was coming to and trying to play it off as if she had been awake the whole time. "Leia," Luke called, sitting himself up. She looked over in acknowledgement, her eyes tired and puffy. "I heard you say something when you were bringing me and Tess in here, about her being related to you. Was that just to get them to pay more attention while taking care of her?" Leia wanted more than anything to say yes. It would have been so much easier, but she could not lie to Luke even if she wanted to. "No," she admitted with a sigh. She doesn't even know it herself. Leia shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable that she had been holding on to this secret for so long. 3 years ago," she continued, "when she finally told me her name was Tess Nabiri, that's when I knew." Luke seemed confused. "The royal family on Naboo?" he asked. "Was your family related to them?" "No," Leia breathed. "Just me. Remember when I told you I was adopted? Well, my birth mother, her name was Padme Nabiri. I wasn't sure Tess was related to her until I saw a list of several names and members of the royal Nibiri family in her notebook. Padme Nibiri was on top. She must have looked up her last name and, of course, found Padme first. She was a young queen and later a senator, so she was by far the most famous member of the Nibiris. Leia took a moment to wipe a tear that fell down her cheek. Luke allowed himself a moment to take it all in. "Could Tess be your sister?" he asked tentatively. Leia shook her head. "Padme Nibiri died when I was very young," the princess explained. "Tess is 14, so she wasn't born until 8 years after my mother died, but Tess looks exactly like me when I was her age, so I would guess she was an illegitimate child of one of Padme's brothers or sisters. Maybe they wanted to give her away or put her up for adoption, but my father got word and wouldn't have of it. That might be why he made sure she had guardians up until she started staying with us." Suddenly, the idea that Beryl Organa was a part of Tess's life, which Tess and Leia had told him soon after the Battle of Yavin 3 years ago, made much more sense. It explained how Leia was so protective of Tess, too. Luke smiled to himself. "What?" Leia asked, unable to resist smiling back. "It just makes sense," Luke told her. You know, through the Force, I can often sense people, and each person has a sort of signature. And out of everyone I've met, the only person whose signature was anywhere near as strong as yours was Tess." Leia grinned at him, almost blushing. "I have a strong signature?" "I guess it runs in your family," Luke shrugged. Making his usual loud entrance, Han stepped into the room and came to Luke's side. Chewbacca followed close behind him. "How you feeling, kid?" he sauntered. "You don't look so bad to me. In fact, you look strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundark." "Thanks to me," sang a familiar voice from her medical bed across the room. Tess sat up slowly as her eyes adjusted to being awake. Leia jumped to a stand and rushed to Tess's side. The princess held herself back for a moment, not wanting to overwhelm the kid, but when Tess's eyes welled up with the mutual relief that she was okay and back with her friends, Leia couldn't resist wrapping her arms tightly around her. "I was so worried I'm fine," Tess promised, hugging Leia back just as tight. She couldn't put her relief into words, and when she thought hard about it, it just brought more tears to her eyes. "I thought I would never see you again." Tess felt Leia's comforting hand on the back of her head, stroking her hair. The princess pulled away a moment to look into Tess's eyes. "You know I love you, right?" she said softly. Tess immediately nodded and hugged Leia again. "I love you too." "You scared the hell out of us, kid," Han interjected. He noticed his burning need to yell at Tess for leaving the base disappeared completely as soon as her eyes opened up. Luke nudged his friend for his insensitive front. "We're glad you're okay, Tess," said Luke. As if to retaliate from almost sounding sentimental, Han crossed over to Leia. "Well, your worship, it looks like you managed to keep me around for a little while longer." Leia pulled away from Tess and squeezed her hand as if to excuse herself before dealing with Han. She scooted off the bed. "I had nothing to do with it," the princess insisted. "General Riken thinks it's dangerous for any ships to leave the system until we've activated the energy shield." Luke and Tess exchanged looks as if to say, "Here we go again." "That's a good story," Han threw back with a smug grin. "I think you just can't bear to let a gorgeous guy like me out of your sight." Leia shook her head slightly. "I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain." "Something he picked up on those smuggling expeditions, I'm sure," Tess suggested, planting her hands behind her head so she could enjoy the show. Chewie let out a deep chuckle. Luke barely suppressed his own laughter. Han shot a sharp look back at his furry co-pilot. "Laugh it up, fuzzball," he muttered. "But you should have seen us alone in the South Passage." He crossed over to Leia and wrapped an arm around her. "She expressed her true feelings for me." Leia's eyes went wide with embarrassment and anger. She bit out her words at him. Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerve-herder!" "Who's scruffy-looking?" Han demanded. He crossed back to Luke with a slight grin of success. "Must have hit her pretty close to the mark to get her all riled up like that, huh, kid?" "Nah, it doesn't take much to get her like that," Tess interjected. Leia shot her a quick glare, and the kid held her hands up in surrender. Then the princess nodded slightly at Han as she walked over to Luke. "Well, I guess you don't know everything about women yet." At that, Leia pulled Luke into a powerful kiss. Tess smacked her on forehead and let her head drop to the pillow. "I give up," she confessed in exaggerated defeat. I give up on trying to make sense of all three of your relationship issues because clearly they will never make sense. Ignoring Tess, Leia pulled away from the kiss, shot Han one last look, then left the room. Han looked after her, then back at Luke, then Tess. You guys take it easy, he said quickly. As expected, he promptly sought after Leia. Tess chuckled at Luke, who had his hands behind his head as if he was the king of the world. You know she likes Han, right? The 14-year-old reminded him. Heck, if you weren't in here, it could have been one of the medics she made out with. Yeah, I know, he told her, his grin unwavering as he looked in Tess's direction. And for the record, that was definitely not making out, just a kiss. Just glad to be of service in Leia's mind games until she wakes up and smells the smuggler. Ew, Tess said, wrinkling her nose. I mean, I want them together as much as anybody, but there's a reason that smuggler is not a scent you see in perfumes. Realizing how revolting that analogy actually was, Luke grimaced. Yeah, you're right. Chapter 11. The first transport is away, an announcement throughout the Echo Base announced. Tess could hear cheers coming from the hangar. Everyone, dressed in their orange bodysuits, seemed to be heading there. One stopped and ruffled Tess's hair. Hey, Tess, he called, walking backwards as he made his way to the hangar with the rest of the pilots. Missed you at the Princess's transport speech. Aw, I missed it, Tess groaned, laughing slightly, waving goodbye to him. Good luck, Dak. You too. Get yourself a transport, kid. Tess reached the command center and scanned the heads of the people on the information systems until she found Leia. She knew enough about the technology in the command center to know that everything on Leia's screen pointed to multiple non-rebellion arrivals on Hoth. Is it the Empire? Leia looked up in surprise, removing her headset. Tess, I told you to get on the transport, she sighed. We caught some Imperial transmissions. It's not safe for anymore, and I can't worry about you while I'm handling this. You don't need to worry about me, Tess reminded Leia, sitting down in the seat beside her. And I'm just as stubborn as you are. I'm staying until we can leave on a transport together. Leia groaned in frustration. Tess, she began. Then Leia caught a glimpse of Tess's face and realized she had more important things to do than argue. That, and Leia knew this was Tess's way of making sure the princess got on a transport too, rather than spending so much time wrapped up in finalizing things at the command center. It was actually pretty smart of the kid, and it sure didn't hurt to know you were cared about even when rebellion efforts as dedicated as Leia's were often left unnoticed. Knowing she had the temporary okay to be there for now, Tess sat back in her chair. Sorry I missed the transport speech, she whispered with a grin. Just the first group, I still have one more, Leia said, smirking. She was clearly aware of Tess's insincerity. I'm sure it was torturous knowing you missed hopping on Wedge's shoulders and making faces at me. Just because I like to see your beautiful smile better than your speech face, Tess reminded her innocently. And maybe a slight bit of revenge for every time you left me to be babysat by 3PO when we were on the Minos cluster last year. Sure, Leia chuckled. Amused, General Riken grinned slightly from behind the princess. He was always surprised that after years of knowing Leia, the only person that could ever suppress her stress so effectively in situations like this was a 14-year-old kid. General, said a rebel across the room. Tess and Leia listened as Riken walked over and stood over the man's screen. General, there's a fleet of Star Destroyers coming out of hyperspace in Sector 4. Reroute all power to the energy shield, the general ordered. He then crossed to another officer and lowered his voice, but not so low that Tess and Leia could not hear him. We've got to hold them until all transports are away. Prepare for gun assault. Tess and Leia exchanged knowing glances. That wasn't the first time they had heard the phrase from Riken. They knew those words meant the Empire was closing in on their rebel base. It did not take long for the Echo Base to become officially under attack. At this point, the command center was nearly in ruins and rumbled periodically like an upset stomach. For at least the 12th time, Leia gave Tess a familiar look. Nope, Tess retorted. I told you, I'm not leaving until you are. The teenager crossed her arms stubbornly. Lines of worry and frustration showed up on Leia's face. Tess did not want her to be frustrated, but after a close call like nearly being frozen to death a week ago, she wasn't about to be apart from Leia even for one flight. Suddenly, the base shook heavily and a quick red flash could be seen down the hall. They heard a cascade of loud thumps as if several large rocks were dropped to the ground one after the other. Leia immediately pulled Tess closer to her as a large command screen detached from its dock and crashed to the ground. Leia sat Tess in the nearest chair. Stay there, she ordered her. Tess knew now was not a moment to distract Leia by arguing back. The princess looked over the shoulder of an officer at an information screen just as Tess noticed Han showing up in the control room doorway. His eyes searched the room nervously until he found Leia and Tess. "Are you two all right?" he asked. Leia's head whipped around. "Why are you still here?" the princess demanded. "I heard the command center had been hit," Han explained, genuinely concerned as he made his way through the rubble. Only then did Tess realize just how severely the front half of the command center was damaged. It almost looked caved in. "You got their clearance to leave," Leia snapped back. Han reached Tess's side and put a hand on her shoulder, nudging her to a stand. "Sure, I'll leave," he grumbled, clearly not in the mood for Leia banter. "But first I'm going to take you and Tess to your ship." "Take Tess with you," Leia ordered. "What?" Tess snapped. "No, I'm leaving with you. I told you that." "Han, please," Leia begged. "Take her out of here. I need to handle this, but I can't do it until I know she's safe." "What about your safety?" Tess shot back. Han nodded in agreement. "Listen to the kid." 3PO, covered in white debris, tapped Princess Leia's arm with his golden hand. "Your Highness, we must take this last transport. It's our only hope," he begged. But Leia was all business, stuck in battle mode. She stomped over debris to a neighboring information screen. "Send all troops from Sector 12 to the South Fold to protect the fighters." Suddenly, another explosion sounded, and once again the room shook. A pathetic 3PO fell backwards with a cry out and had to be caught by Han. An announcement sounded throughout the base. "Imperial troops have entered the base! Imperial troops have entered—" And the announcement broke off with a burst of static. Tess, worry widening her eyes, waited nervously on the other side of the room. "Leia, we have to go. We've both been captured by Imperial troops before," Tess reminded her. "And I'd rather not meet Darth's spontaneous force choke today." Han reached Leia's side and grabbed her arm. "Come on," he said. He wasn't going to take no for an answer, and Leia knew this really was her last chance to get her and Tess off the base safely. She turned to give one last note to the officers who remained in the command center. "Evacuate the remaining ground staff," she told them, as Han pulled Leia forward and Tess led the way out. By the time Han, Leia, and Tess had reached the hallway leading to the hangar, the Echo base seemed to be under full attack. Tess was leading, but then she looked behind her and groaned with frustration. 3PO took a wrong turn, she muttered, turning around. "I'll be right back." "Hurry," Leia said. As soon as Tess found 3PO and put him back on the right track, she heard a rumble and a crash and a familiar scream. "Leia!" Tess cried out, running back down the hall. "We're okay," the princess cried back. Looking behind her, the 14-year-old saw that the hallway had collapsed and blocked their exit. Han started pulling both girls to the opposite direction while speaking on his comlink. "Transport this as Solo," he said diplomatically. "Let her take off. I can't get to you. We'll get him out on the Falcon." Tess was running too fast to express her excitement. Not only was the Falcon 1,000 times better than the standard transports, but Chewie owed her 72 credits, and Tess knew she could double that by beating him at yet another game of Pizzac. Chapter 12, Millennium Falcon, 3 ABY. 2 left turns of the corridor and the Millennium Falcon was finally in sight. The 3 raced up the ramp with 3PO trailing close behind them and Chewbacca waiting for them inside. "Did Luke get out all right?" Tess asked no one in particular. She secured herself into a seat with acceleration straps before Leia could tell her to do it. "He's fine," Leia told her. She didn't officially know that he had safely made his way off to the Dagobah system to do whatever he refused to tell her, but she felt it and therefore responded as such. She didn't have time to think too much about it. Han started fiddling with the ship's controls in a manner that he only used when the ship had not been very trustworthy lately. The Falcon always had the worst timing with its needs for maintenance. "Would it help if I get out and pushed?" Leia spat. Tess rolled her eyes at Leia's constant need to bicker with the smuggler-turned-captain. "It might," he retorted sarcastically, ignoring whatever the golden droid was trying to pester him with. Han made his way swiftly to the cockpit and Leia followed. 3PO trailed close behind, as always, leaving the Wookiee and Tess in the main room. They exchanged glances. "You owe me 72 credits, she reminded him, pulling out her deck of Pizzac cards and shuffling them. "Double or nothing?" The 7-foot furball shook his head vigorously. Before he could growl his way out of the credits he owed the 14-year-old, Han called him over. Without Chewbacca there to entertain her, Tess figured she'd just turn off 3PO and take his seat up in the cockpit. By the time Tess had got to the cockpit, the 4th seat had not been taken, so she snagged it before the golden droid came back. Once again, she faced the race of securing the acceleration straps before Leia told her to. "We might need 3PO up here. Why didn't you just stay by the lounge seats?" Leia asked. "You'd probably be more comfortable there." "We're on my ship now where I'm boss and I say Tess stays," Han ordered, only half jokingly. You know Goldenrod won't sit down anywhere where he can't be fastened in, and with these 4 seats taken, that puts him far away from me, just where I like him." "You just say that because you can't find his power-off button," Leia snapped back. Could we get away from the Empire before you guys start fighting again?" Tess suggested, her eyes widening at the sight of the Star Destroyers and the other Empire ships following them. Leia followed her glance, then shot Han a look. "They're getting closer," she warned. Han reached forward towards the controls. "Oh yeah? Watch this!" Han Solo flipped the control forward. Tess held onto her seat, expecting the jump to lightspeed before the ship hummed, then the humming decelerated, a clear indicator that the attempt failed. As if things couldn't get any worse, 3PO entered the cockpit. "If I may say so, sir," the annoying droid began, "I noticed earlier that the hyperdrive motor has been damaged. It's impossible to go to lightspeed." Muttering something about being in trouble, Han raced out the bulkhead door. "You know, sometimes you should just spit these things out rather than spending so much time getting our attention," Tess suggested the 3PO with clenched teeth. She hopped up to her feet, knowing that leaving Chewie to hand Han the tools would just end badly. By the time Tess caught up with Han, he was already fiddling with the controls, and Chewie had already messed up one tool handoff, and rather than looking for the right one, he set the toolbox by the opening in the floor that Han had ducked into. "I'm here," Tess told him, reaching for the toolbox. "Tess, go back to the cockpit," he grumbled, tucking his head back into the floor opening that housed the controls. "The last thing I need is a smart-mouth kid to deal with right now." The ship shook as something hit the Falcon, moving the toolbox to the point that it almost fell on Han's head. After that last comment he made, Tess justified kicking it in as a means for him to learn his lesson about underestimating her. The plasteel toolbox fell directly onto the smuggler, who cried out in pain and raised his head out of the compartment. Tess pointed an accusatory finger at Chewie. "Chewie!" Han growled. Again the Millennium Falcon shook with some sort of impact. Tess barely managed to stay on 2 feet as she watched Han's face change. "That wasn't a laser blast," he concluded. "Something hit us." "Han, get up here!" Leia called from the cockpit. After so much racing about the ship, Tess was almost reconsidering getting out of everyone's hair by sitting in the lounge chair with accelerator restraints towards the other side of the ship. Han, Tess, and Chewie returned to their cockpit seats, suddenly facing their next challenge even before Leia called it. "Asteroids!" To everyone else's dismay, Han and Chewie started propelling the ship straight into the asteroid field. "What are you doing?" Leia demanded, standing over Han's chair like the backseat flyer she always insisted on being. "You're not actually going into an asteroid field." "They'd be crazy to follow us, wouldn't they?" Han suggested. Leia's eyes widened as she realized he was serious. "You don't have to do this to impress me." "Is this because you think I kicked the toolbox on your head?" Tess interjected. "Because I told you that was Chewie." Chewbacca growled a whining protest. 3PO entered the room, once again just making a bad situation more annoying. "Sir, the chances of successfully—" Tess snapped off his power before he could continue. Han took a moment to turn to the kid. "You're my new favorite."